Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Father Dominic Roscioli, Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Okay. Tell me when your family came to Kenosha.
Well, on my father's side would be Domenico Roscioli and Rosa Barati, and they were married and they came in the early 1920s. On my mother's side would be Frank Cosentino and Dina Huffman. They were married and they came in right about 1920.
Okay. And what did your grandfather on your father's side do?
He did serve in World War I. He also worked at Simmons. I think they were making mattresses. And he also, we grew up in that Roscioli house, and he was quite the gardener. We had probably 15 fruit trees.
Okay.
And there were all kinds of tomato plants and just a big Italian garden.
Okay. Was that typical at the time?
It was. Almost every yard when I was growing up in the 1950s was almost all garden. People were still canning. There weren't too many big box grocery stores at that time. It was like the tail end of the corner grocery stores, and there were quite a few of them still in the neighborhood, like Guidotti's on 22nd and Model Market, Del Frate's and on 24th. So that's pretty much what he did.
Okay. And was there any friendly competition in the neighborhood between gardens or produce or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, the people compared tomatoes, and I remember going for a walk with my dad one time through the neighborhood, and he said, oh, these people are very rich, because not only did they have a garden full of vegetables, but they had a grape arbor and they had fig trees. Mm. They still grow, some Italian people here still grow fig trees. You have to bury them every winter. So they're 6 months down and 6 months up.
And then what about your grandfather on your mother's side?
Well, my mother would refer to him as one of the boys. He was, it was during Prohibition. He had about 250 stills. He had a number of nightclubs and bars. And my mother remembers when she was growing up as a little girl that the women would come over and cook for about 3 days because the big man was coming for supper. Well, the big man was Al Capone. And I said, well, who else was there? And she said, well, the chief of police, the mayor. So it's like...
So where did he have 250 stills?
Most of them were gutted houses. They appeared to be a home with curtains and everything, and they would buy the house, gut it. Quite a few of them also were farms out in the country. So they were scattered throughout southeast Wisconsin, because southeastern Wisconsin, this corner, belonged to Chicago gang, Al Capone. And then the Balistraries had pretty much the rest of Wisconsin. But they were scattered in homes. And so they appeared to be as if someone's living there. And my mother also remembers that when the feds were in town, she said all the alcohol was being dumped down the sewer. She said the whole neighborhood smelled like alcohol.
Okay, and your father, did he serve in World War II then?
My father flew 50 missions. He was a bombardier, and he flew 50 missions. as a bombardier, and then he came back home, and then he worked for a grocery supply store called Our Own. It was run by Heine Keene family. And the building's still there. It's in the Columbus Park neighborhood. I think now it's a condo, actually. And they supplied all the small grocery stores, the corner grocery stores. So he worked there a number of years. But when he first came home from the war, they worked with the Manna family, and they started the Dandy Bar Company. And the Dandy Bar Company was an ice cream bar called Dandy Bar. The competition was Sammy Bar Company, and these were kids on bikes selling ice cream bars and popsicles. And I remember talking to like my brother who had one of the bikes. You made 3 cents on a popsicle. You made 5 cents on a ice cream bar, Dandy Bar. There's no minimum wage. It's just whatever you made. So they hit all the factories, they hit the schools, and they usually try to outrun by bike the Sammy Bar people, especially at American Motors, when they came out on break.
Okay, and then what did your mother do?
She was at home quite a bit as a homemaker, but she also worked at Isserman Brothers as a secretary downtown Kenosha. She also worked at Mary's Parkview Restaurant, which was in Columbus Park, right across the street from the park. She worked at Mac's Canteen, which was a neighborhood favorite on 22nd Avenue and 52nd Street. And her and my father ran a delicatessen on the state line called Larry's Town and Country for about 10 or 12 years.
And then what did he do before he retired?
He worked at American Motors for 10, 12 years.
Okay.
Then it was Chrysler. Yeah.
Right. So where did you go to school?
Well, my mother wanted us to go to a Catholic school. All the Catholic schools were filled at that time in the neighborhood, like St. Anthony's, the ones you would walk to, Holy Rosary. Mount Carmel did not have a school. I went to Mount Carmel kindergarten for 3 years. I was there. I kept saying to my mother, how many years do I have to go to kindergarten? But I think it was like daycare,
Okay.
And we had the Sisters of Charity of St. Joan Antida. They came over here from Italy right after the war. They were invited to come and help with the Italian immigrants after World War II. And they served at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church. So then I did go to, my mother was able to get us into St. James Grade School, which at that time was predominantly Irish parish. I think we were one of 3 Italian families in the parish. And you knew it. But and you would take the red line. You would catch the bus at Geromo's Tavern, corner of 56th Street and 22nd Avenue, for a quarter. That takes you down to the museum, Kenosha Museum, which now I think is a dinosaur museum. And then you walk a couple blocks and you're at St. James. Or most of the time we would walk by the tracks from pick them up in the Columbus Park neighborhood, walk the tracks under the viaduct on 56th Street, and then go to school that way. That way we saved the quarter, and then we could go to Bill's lunch place, which is no longer there. At one time it was bought by Manja's. Manja's was there for quite a while. And you could get a bag of French fries for a quarter. And everybody in the playground just begged you for one French fry.
So you mentioned that you were one of 3 Italian families at St. James School.
Yeah.
How did you know that you were one of 3?
Because most everybody else was Irish.
They treated you different or no?
In a friendly kind of way. Yeah, like, what are you Italians doing here? It was playful then, it wasn't, it was you joked around a lot more.
Okay, and then where did you go to school after that?
Well, I should mention at St. James we had the Cincinnati Dominicans, and there were about 300 kids in the school, And at the time in the 1950s, I was the only Dominic there. So I did very well there because of my name. Then right from there, I went to the seminary in Milwaukee, St. Francis de Sales Seminary. The first year was at Kinnickinnick Avenue, which is now Thomas More High School. And the original building was there. And then they built de Sales right on Lake Michigan. And so I went to the seminary for the 4 years of high school. I left 1 year and went to Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, because I was interested in becoming a Dominican, and they wanted me to go there because they had a house there, a house of studies. But then I went back to the diocese and completed another 7 years there. So it's 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of divinity school. And I was ordained in 1974.
Okay, and then what was your assignment after that?
First assignment, cast 1,000 St. Alphonsus in Greendale. We had 4 priests, we had 10,000 registered parishioners, 800 kids in the school, 1,200 kids in CCD. It was when we joked it was like the Cecil B. DeMille version of the Catholic parish. It was a good experience. I still am friends with a number of those families from that first assignment. Then I also was in hospital work, St. Francis Hospital, as a chaplain. I was at St. John the Baptist in Plymouth as a parish priest, Blessed Sacrament Parish in Milwaukee. And then I got sick with a lung disease called sarcoidosis. So that sent me back a year kind of on sick leave, and then I was starting to go back to work in the parish. And then a year after I got sarcoidosis, I got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And they basically didn't think I was going to make it. And so they sent me home on sick leave, and I was taking chemo, going back and forth to Mayo Clinic every 17 days for chemo. And while I was at home, a number of old timers, that would be my grandparents' generation, came to see me because they figured I was dying. And literally they said to me, "Too bad you're dying." They said, "We could use some help in the neighborhood." And they were talking about Kenosha was going through some changes with gangs moving in from Chicago and Milwaukee, some drug houses popping up, some human trafficking starting to happen. You know, things that Kenosha was pretty insulated from that for quite a while, because most of it was in Milwaukee or Chicago. But then they were looking for new territory, and it was affecting, obviously, the quality of life in Columbus Park neighborhood.
What year was that?
That would have been early 80s. So I came back home. I went into remission when I was in 1983. So it would have been around about 83, 84.
Okay.
And so they asked me to call a neighborhood meeting. So I called a neighborhood meeting in the basement of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church. 153 people showed up. At the time, my cousin was, a distant cousin was the mayor, John Bellotti, and he came over and told me he wanted me to not have the meeting, that I'd be opening up a can of worms. And so from that day on, I was clashing with city officials over what was really happening in the neighborhood, who owned the houses. Some city officials owned houses that were associated with drugs and troubles, a lot of police calls. And so I was in the paper a lot, because the battle raged for quite a few years to improve the quality of life in Columbus Park neighborhood. So we had meetings, we were organized, we started a nonprofit organization, we bought up some property. Father Riquetta, who was a pastor of Mount Carmel at the time, my mother and I bought a property on the corner of 22nd Avenue, 55th Street. For a while we had we called it the Farfalina Drive-In Restaurant. We had old-fashioned drive-in restaurant. Then it became the New Earth store.
What was a New Earth store?
The New Earth store was our neighborhood organization called Kenosha in Neighborhoods. Started recycling in the city of Kenosha.
What type of recycling?
The first thing we started was collecting bags of leaves. We went to the Public Works Department. Now you're talking middle 1980s. We went to the Kenosha Public Works and we told them we'd like them to park a semi-truck there so we could hire neighborhood kids to unload bags of leaves that people would bring and empty the bags into the truck. Waste management, Mike Infazino was in charge of the waste management plant, the site out in Kenosha County, and he agreed to start a compost program. And what's funny is that when we were at the meeting with Public Works, I remember the head of Public Works said to me, "You actually think people are going to rake their leaves, put them in bags, and bring them to you?" I said, "Yeah, they will, because they care about the environment." Well, he laughed out loud, but the program was so successful that we expanded then to start collecting bottles and cans, and we had bins for all those recyclables. We were making trips. We bought a truck. I had probably 10, 12 people working for me at one time, because then we started buying houses, fixing up the houses, and we were recycling. And it was during that time that someone came to see me from Ocean Spray Cranberries, wanting to know if we would recycle their food leftovers. And basically it was cranberries hulls, cranberry skins and rice hulls, because that's what they had a lot of, and they didn't want to landfill it. They thought, well, we should make some good compost out of this. So we started this program called WIS Compost with Waste Management, Ocean Spray Cranberries, and our neighborhood organization, KIN Incorporated.
So where did you get the money to hire people and buy up houses?
I wrote grant money. I wrote for grants. We made money on the recyclables. What's funny is the recyclables program was going so well that obviously we're getting the revenue from it, and we also we contracted with the city to do the recycling for the city. We were operating 2 sites, and money was starting to come in because they were paying for newspapers, they were paying for aluminum cans, they were paying for glass at the time. That when it was time to renew our contract, the city of Kenosha underbid us by thousands of dollars because they wanted the program. So, but the money was coming in from recyclables and from grant money. I wrote for grants.
So during all this time, you were not assigned to a parish. You were on disability.
I was still on disability because of my cancer and my lung disease. And also during this time, I had a lot of free time, and there was an article in the Chicago Tribune that Paul Newman had started a camp for kids with cancer in Connecticut, and they were looking for volunteers.
What was that called?
The Hole in the Wall Gang Camp, based after the movie Sundance.
Butch Cassidy.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Because in that movie there was a hole in the mountains where the outlaws hid from the law. And so Paul Newman thought there should be a place where kids who had cancer and other life-threatening illnesses could go and become kids again. Basically, he said, to raise a little hell. And so I started volunteering out there, and I eventually was hired to be on their summer staff, and also I volunteered there for 20 years in the programs with the kids. And then we started doing programs with the parents, getaway weekends for the parents. So I got a whole nother family out there.
Okay. Okay, and when did you retire as a priest?
Well, what happened was
assignment?
eventually there was a lot of movement to get me out of Kenosha because I was causing some trouble. And I was naming landlords who owned slum property who were prominent citizens. And there was a pressure to get me out of the city, and they were saying, well, if he can do all this work why is he on sick leave? And then it was Archbishop Weekland, who I went to see, and he was telling me he was getting pressure from people that they want me out of the city. And what he said to me was, I'm going to keep you there as long as you want to stay, because I think the church should be in the streets. And so I was kind of protected by him then, that I could do all these different ministries and plus help out at parishes on weekends and still do social justice work, which is kind of funny because when I was in the seminary, my classmates who were in social justice issues, I would call them Looney Tunes. I said, we're not going to change people that way. You change them by preaching, you know. And so then they started calling me Father Looney Tunes. So.
Okay, the New Earth store, it sold products as well?
Yes, we sold all kinds of books and toys, anything to promote the environment. And so it was quite busy. I found a review of the store online that I had never known it had happened. And the way the review person wrote it up was, he said, it's a store in search of a museum, because he said it's the kind of store you see at a museum. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was going to different museums to see what are they promoting and what can I get into the neighborhood to create awareness that by recycling, we're saving not only the neighborhood but our planet, that it makes a difference what kind of waste we put out there.
Okay. Did you get into any other kind of activity other than direct social activity, the New Earth store and recycling? Did you get into any other endeavors?
Well, eventually we started a sauce company called Father Dom's Mom's Pasta Sauce, and that's in several stores and also used for fundraising. And then recently we started Father Dom's Mom's Hot Cocoa Mix, and then I'm working with the Wisconsin Veterans Outreach in Racine. I discovered they have tiny homes, villages for veterans. They're getting them homeless veterans off the streets and helping them get into apartments and sometimes part-time jobs. And so we started a wine company. Well, I had a wine company called Holy Spirits Wines, and that I started to get the saints back into people's homes. That wine is for instance, at Tenuta's, and they've been selling it for years. And then with that wine company, I work with LaDuca Brothers Wine out of Milwaukee, and I said we should do something for veterans. So we started what they call a Salute to Veterans, and that's been taking off pretty well. And we are sending monies to the tiny villages on Ute Street in Racine. So we send them part of our proceeds. And all this was part of my getting to know Paul Newman as well, because he started his products kind of as a joke as well. And they took off. But he started the whole idea of selling a product for a cause. And at one time, going back to the compost project, I sent him a bag of Wiscompost to his New York office. And then I got this strange call from Tom Endow, who was with Newman's Own Products, and he was really nervous on the phone. He says, "Father Dom, I don't know who you are. I never met you." And I got the strangest email from, or message from Paul Newman. I said, "Well, go ahead and read it." "I don't know, Father." "Let's go ahead and read it." He said, "Help Father Dom with his poop," but he didn't use the word poop. It rhymes with mitt. All right. And so that sent me to the New York office of Paul Newman's label design people, Charlie Zunda. Zunda Design labels are create all of Newman's own product labels. And I went there with my mom, and he fell in love with my mom. So he said, "Father Dom, I'm going to help you and your mom for the rest of my life." And he designs our labels. And so then we came up with Father Dom's Ducks Do Compost. And that was endorsed by Rose Societies. That was the cranberry mixture. We were in 6 states, ready to go national. The cranberry industry from Canada, Oregon, and Cape Cod contacted me about how can we compost our cranberry residue. I figured, here it is. I'm going to become a millionaire on Father Dom's Ducks Do Compost and help all kinds of people. Just then, somebody invents a machine that when they crush the cranberries, there's nothing left but paste. So there was nothing left to compost. So that's when I had to be creative and go into other products. And but all that goes back to connecting with Paul Newman. He was real easy to be with. He would show up at camp. Kids didn't know who he was. And I remember asking one time one of the campers, "Who'd you go fishing with?" And he said, "Oh, that old guy over there." It was Paul Newman.
Okay, so you still produce all of these products,
Yeah.
and did you ever think all this stuff would happen, given your illness and the work you had done prior in parishes?
No. I thought my life was going to be kind of preset as a parish priest. Go here for so many years, go there for so many years. It all really goes back to getting sick. And so for me, I tell people cancer was the biggest blessing I ever had in my whole life, because it brought me into so many different people's lives, so many different adventures in business. It was funny, I'd go to trade shows in Las Vegas and trade shows in Chicago for the compost, and people would come up to me and say, "Are you really a priest, or is this just a marketing thing?" I said, And it's amazing because at those trade shows, I think I heard more confessions than I did in the parish confessional. Because you're the priest
Right.
available, and they'd come to talk to you about the compost and say, "You got a minute?" So it created that whole other layer of ministry where people won't come to a rectory door and knock on the door, but if they see a priest, they'll come and talk to him because he's available. He's there, So, no, it's been a blessing. It's been a surprise, too. And now I'm working at a parish called St. Teresa of Calcutta in North Lake, Wisconsin. My mother's still alive. She's 101 years old. They love her, and we have a house to live in, and I'm planting lots of flowers. I just put in some grapevines, and this year I bought a fig tree. So it's almost like being home.
So what's next?
I don't know. It's up to God.
Are you looking for other products?
Yeah, I'm always ready for another product. Yeah, I've also helped a lot of people who came to me and said, "Well, I got this recipe and I want to do something with it. You know, how did you get going? So I've shared a lot of that with people and helped them along the way, which is funny because I have no background in business, but it's just by trial and error. And you know, if you fall, you just get up and try something else. The sauce has really taken off. And the Holy Spirit's wines, where they have different saints on the wines, it was kind of my sneaky way of getting the saints back into the house. Because I would have parents say to me, well, my kids don't go to church anymore. And I said, but I bought them each a bottle of your saintly wine. And guess what? On Christmas Day, we were arguing about the saints. I said, well, just a starting point, you know. And so that goes well in Catholic circles, but the salute to veterans is going well everywhere, because I really don't believe homeless and veterans should be in the same sentence, you know, and that we have to do something to help them, whatever we can. And then when I found out what was going on in Racine, I thought that's the perfect place to send the money, because they're doing it, and they're partnering with SC Johnson, and they're making it happen.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about Paul Newman.
The way I first met him was I was kind of a novelty at the Hole in the Wall gang camp, because I'm a priest, and I wasn't dressed like a priest. You know, I'm dressed like you're dressed for summer camp. And I'm working with, I was one of, you know, I'm a volunteer, and at that time I was in my late 30s, early 40s, and the rest of the staff is like in their early 20s. Maybe the oldest one there would be 25, 30. So one time we had a pool party by the pool, and it was nighttime, and I was part of the cleanup crew, and some of the counselors threw me in the water. After the kids had left, they threw me in the pool. So the next morning, I used to get up real early and go get coffee before the kids got up, and there was enough coverage in the cavern with supervision. And I was walking to the dining hall to get some coffee. Paul Newman goes by on his bike. He would come to camp and stay at a cabin, and he was riding his bike around to get around. And I just said, oh, hello, Mr. Newman. And then he slammed on the brakes, waited for me to catch up to him. He says, first of all, just call me Paul. And by the way, he said, I heard you went for an unauthorized swim in my pool. You know, that's how I met him. Because he said it was like he was angry. And then he just burst out laughing. He says, you know, thanks for volunteering. But he was down to earth. The first few years, several years, he would have all of the staff over at his house for a pool party and cookout. He had a barn that they had turned into like a party place, and in there were all his awards and whatever he got as an actor. But that didn't mean a whole lot to him. What he wanted to do was to help these kids. And so he started with the one camp, and now there's several camps all over the world that were started by his money, and they're under the umbrella of the Newman's Own. One thing that happened at the camp in Ireland that was really funny is I volunteered there one summer, and I overheard two kids from Scotland and one kid from Ireland, and they were talking about me, and I overheard them. They didn't know I could hear them, and in their heavy brogues, I heard them say, you wouldn't know he's a priest. The other one said, no, he's actually quite regular. And then the other one said, he's almost like one of us. And I thought, well, that's like the biggest compliment I could get. You know? But I mean, I never would have gone to that camp or Ireland or had all those experiences with all those children and their families who are different religions and different backgrounds. And it was the one place I've ever been in the whole world where people say, well, what's the address of the camp? I said, well, the sign says Connecticut. But I said, it's somewhere between this world and the next. I said, everybody gets along. You got Jews and Arabs in the same cabin. You got whites and blacks. You got kids speaking Spanish, kids speaking Polish, all in the same cabin. And the common denominator is their fragileness. And the next common denominator is they want to have fun together. You know, it was just a most amazing place to be. I have never met anyone who didn't go there and didn't change their life.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.